Planet Mission Part 1 by David Claiborne, as read by the author. New chapters every Monday. The full novel is available on Amazon.com and other online retailers. Links in the description. Chapter 12. The Worst Trip of Your Life. Bo emerged from his trailer the next morning to see an enormous six-wheeled vehicle parked outside of Tommy's and Junebuck's trailer. A crew of worker positions was already cleaning up wreckage caused by the storm. They disassembled and tossed rubble and debris into the back of a covered truck, and a heavy weight descended periodically to compact the debris. Worker positions will molecularize the wreckage for recycling and reprinting into new components at the factory, Alice said, appearing seemingly out of nowhere to answer a question no one had asked. Bo jumped. "Alice, you startled me." "I do apologize." "What about Waters and Jazzy's stuff?" "Our understanding was that their clothing and possessions were no longer usable. It, too, will be recycled for reuse at the factory. I took the liberty of supplying them with new clothing yesterday." "Yes, we saw." An awkward pause ensued. Alice clutched a tablet to her chest and stared at Bo but said nothing. "So what are you doing here, Alice?" Tommy and Junebuck emerged from their trailer. Molly came out as well. "Today is your departure day. As your concierge, I am here to make sure that your journey's start is uneventful," Alice said. "Certainly your director has shared the schedule with all of you." "No, something else kept us busy most of yesterday," Bo said. He was astounded that Alice did not seem more concerned about the storm or the ruination of the trailers. "We're not staying to help with the cleanup here?" "No, your director, in consultation with Dr. Beebe, has escalated your departure. Allow me to demonstrate the features of your rover," she said, referring to the enormous six-wheeled vehicle parked between the trailers. "What about the gigantic storm that destroyed this entire place last night?" Bo said, exasperated. "Were there any casualties? Don't you need help?" "I can assure you that we are fully equipped to handle the cleanup from such an event. As you can see, reconstruction has already started." "I can see that, but I mean, was anyone hurt? Is everyone okay?" "There were minor injuries only among some of the worker positions. A few were reportedly and unadvisedly playing golf instead of sheltering in the space elevator's base and suffered minor abrasions." "That's it?" "That is it." "What about the spaceport? What about the elevator? What about the trailers? These got destroyed." "The spaceport was designed specifically to withstand such storms. Its metal alloy construction is quite sturdy." "This all seems too casual, Alice." "I can assure you that this is not our first such event. If you have no more questions, please allow me to demonstrate the features of the rover." "I'll handle it," Tommy said. "I've used them plenty." "It is part of my position's duties, Lieutenant Atkins," Alice said. "Don't let me stop you then," Tommy replied, knowing further argument would be futile. The rover was a monster of a vehicle, the wheels almost as tall as any of the missionaries. The cab was a long rectangular shape with a bay of windows at the front like a cockpit. The cab sat just above the front tires. They would have to climb to get inside. Alice delicately kicked her foot between the first and second tires, and a small stepladder folded down leading up to the door. Inside it was spacious, but they still had to stoop while inside. Bo sat on one of the bench seats, where there was plenty of room to stretch his legs. Another row of bench seats and 2 seats in the cockpit area for a driver and passenger filled out the front of the rover's interior. Behind them was a large area for cargo, though they could have fit another row or 2 of benches if needed. Parts of the roof and sides were transparent. Between the 2 rows of benches there was a hatch. When Bo reached up and popped it open, another stepladder descended and he stuck his head out. Tommy popped up next to him, the hatch providing room for both. The top of the rover was covered in solar collection panels. Towards the front was an array of navigation and communication equipment. To the rear was a set of folded metal bars. Bo turned around and bumped a tubular set of controls. The bars unfolded into a honeycombed arm. We get generic loopy fruits to eat, but I bet that controller alone costs $30,000, Tommy said. They could plug in my nephew's game controller for about $50 and do the same thing. Stick your hand in. Bo put his hand in the tube and it formed to fit his arm. The folded metal bars at the rear opened into an arm with 2 fingers and a thumb that mimicked his movements. He wiggled his fingers and the electronic arm opened and closed its claw. He made the OK sign and the arm pinched 2 clamps together and held the third up delicately. It was not perfect, but it was a good approximation. Cool, Bo said. No rude gestures, please, Tommy joked. That is for loading and unloading equipment, Alice called up from inside the cab. Please do not recreate with the expensive equipment. Oh, we're going to do nothing but play with this, Tommy said, not at all worried about Alice's pursed-lipped response. Hi, Alex. Bo used the mechanical arm to wave at Waters and Jazzy as they came around the corner of a trailer. Waters grinned and jogged toward them. Jazzy crossed her arms. They need 2 arms, then you could back 2 rowers up and box, Tommy said. Bo obliged him by making a fist and punching motion with the arm. The motion rocked the whole rover. Please, Alice cried. Better not get her too worked up, she might get friendly, Tommy said, and popped back into the cab. Bo reluctantly pulled his arm out of the tube and went back inside. The mechanical arm automatically returned to its rest position along the back of the rover. Waters climbed up the step into the cab. This thing is great, he said. Alice proceeded to walk them through the uses of the switches and buttons on the console of the cockpit. There were only a few of them. She pinched the display screen and flicked up the projection screen and began explaining the various menus, how to activate various systems and customize settings, and Bo's mind began to wander. I think I should be the one to drive us as the director, Bo heard Waters say, breaking out of his introspection. Don't worry, Waters, you'll get plenty of chances to drive. We all will. You'll wish you hadn't by the time we're done. This is going to be the worst trip of your life, Tommy said. It can't be worse than falling from space, Jazzy said. Tommy only smiled in reply. I am sure your journey will be an uneventful one. I wish you all great success in your mission, Alice said. For the glory of the administration. Guess it's time we load everything then, Bo said. He and Tommy looked at each other for a moment before they both sprang for the hatch, eager to operate the arm, only to find that Junebug was already there. Rather, he was still there. He had been there since Bo had vacated the seat and had not left the armatron, as he called it, since. This thing is great, Junebug said. It's just like a toy I had when I was a kid. He had donned a helmet from the envirosuits and played with the arm. Bo, Waters called from outside the rover. Come help get things set up outside. Guess we'd better get everything ready to load then, Bo said, dejected. Alice disappeared without anyone seeing her go. The missionaries opened the rear hatch and set about loading the rover. Tommy was not wrong about it being their worst trip ever. The colony was nearly 300 kilometers from the spaceport, and to get there they had to cross the plains, a marsh, navigate the forest and foothills of a mountain range, and then cross the mountain range itself to finally reach the settlement. This won't be too bad, Waters had said. 300 kilometers isn't that far. It should only take us a few hours to get there. It would be less than a day's trip on Earth. Waters' estimations were quickly shown to be flawed. Polus had no roads. As flat as the plains looked, every bump and hole, rock, bush, shrub, arroyo, gully, and hill became an obstacle. Even the grass, which not far from the spaceport grew tall enough to obscure the rover's wheels, was an obstacle. It was tough and springy. Were it not for their machinery, they would have worn themselves out. The terrain limited the rover to traveling no faster than a few kilometers an hour. The enormous wheels of the rover handled the terrain fine, mostly, but it was built for durability, not for comfort. With only the benches inside to sit on, the missionaries were tossed against their restraints with every bump. Each jolt transferred directly into their bodies. After less than an hour, most of them gave up and moved to the floor or used duffel bags as makeshift cushions. Junebug was the only one still sitting in a seat. He napped, somehow, leaning forward against his safety belt. The envirosuit helmet he still wore knocked arrhythmically against the side of the rover whenever they hit a bump. How can he sleep like that? Tommy asked. There was no way to answer that question. They spent several days driving over the plains, long enough to become accustomed to the monotony. They only stopped to swap the batteries. Waters and Jazzy, anxious to reach the colony, pushed them onward. At first, Bo was intent on documenting every moment of their journey. He regretted missing the storm, the mission's biggest event so far. Though Alice promised to send him footage from the spaceport's cameras, it was not the same. He stood in the top hatch and watched the terrain roll by. There was not much to capture, however, and after a while he mostly used it as an excuse to stand. He admitted, though, that there were some lovely sights. Bluffs and canyons in the distance with sides painted deep reds and oranges, colors in the sky, especially the night sky, distant trees and plants with leaves the color of no plant he had ever seen before, water flowing in great tracks reflecting the sky in glassy relief. One thing they had not yet seen was any wildlife, much to Molly's disappointment. Not even a bird. Plants, however, were abundant. The Polus vines and its fruit were everywhere. It would have been obnoxious were the fruit not so tasty. It seemed like the farther they traveled from the spaceport, the sweeter it became. It was also very filling. Just a bite was enough to satisfy them for many hours. "We may die of boredom, but we won't go hungry at least," Jazzy said. "How could you be bored?" Junebug said, fascinated by each new blade of grass. Sleeping at night was another puzzle altogether. They really had no choice but to sleep in the rover instead of making camp. Early on, they had discovered that the grass was not only tall, but incredibly dense. It was not just that there was a lot of it packed tightly, although that was true. It was also that the grass resisted being trampled. Trying to push through it was like trying to run through water. There was no flattening it down to pitch a shelter to speak of. So, when none of them wanted to continue driving at night, they stopped. Tommy slept under the stars on the roof, a feat the others could not be persuaded to attempt for fear of rolling off in their sleep. The interior of the rover was not too bad, albeit crowded. A couple people could lie down between the benches if they alternated head to foot. There were also the driver and passenger seats, which reclined and were the most comfortable. Those quickly became the most coveted seats in the rover. Although they managed, they grew tired of the routine. They snapped at each other over little annoyances until one morning their spirits lifted when the grass began to break and they spotted trees in the distance.